I collapsed at my own wedding reception, my throat closing as my sister smiled and whispered, "You always had to be the center of attention." She had put peanuts in my cake, knowing I'm deathly allergic. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The morning of my wedding dawned perfect and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at the Fairmont Hotel. I should have been the happiest woman alive. After 6 years of medical school and residency, I was finally marrying David, the love of my life, and starting the next chapter as Dr. Rachel Morrison. My name is Rachel Thompson, soon to be Morrison, and at 28 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. I was a successful emergency room physician at Chicago General, engaged to a wonderful man, and surrounded by family and friends who loved me. Or so I believed. As I stood in front of the mirror in my white silk gown, my sister Brooklyn was behind me, carefully arranging my veil. At 25, she was 3 years younger, but had always carried herself with a confidence that I envied. Where I was methodical and careful, Brooklyn was spontaneous and charming. Where I had spent my 20s buried in medical textbooks, she had pursued her dreams of becoming an actress in Los Angeles. "You look absolutely stunning," Brooklyn said, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. "David is going to lose his mind when he sees you." I smiled at her reflection in the mirror. Despite our different paths, we had always been close. Brooklyn had flown in from LA 2 weeks early to help with wedding preparations, throwing herself into every detail with enthusiasm that touched my heart. "I can't believe my little sister is getting married before me," she laughed, but something flickered across her expression too quickly for me to interpret. "Mom always said you'd be the one to settle down first." Our mother had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer, and our father had died in a car accident when we were teenagers. Brooklyn and I were each other's only family, which made her presence at my wedding even more meaningful. She had insisted on being my maid of honor, planning my bachelorette party, and even volunteering to coordinate with the caterers on the morning of the wedding. "Someone has to keep the family tradition of successful marriages alive," I teased, adjusting my diamond earrings, a gift from David's grandmother. "Your turn will come, Brooke. The right person is out there." Brooklyn's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, though some of us aren't lucky enough to have everything handed to us. Before I could ask what she meant, our wedding coordinator, Marina, burst through the door with a clipboard and a harried expression. "Ladies, we need to start moving. The photographer wants to capture some getting ready shots, and then we have family photos before the ceremony. Brooklyn, the florist, needs to confirm the boutonniere arrangements, and Rachel, your future mother-in-law, is asking about the ceremony timeline." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of photos, last-minute preparations, and mounting excitement. Brooklyn seemed to be everywhere at once, checking on flowers, coordinating with vendors, and ensuring every detail was perfect. Her dedication was touching, and I felt grateful to have such a devoted sister. "Brooke has been incredible," I told David's mother, Patricia, as we waited for the photographer to set up another shot. "I don't know what I would have done without her." Patricia smiled warmly. "She certainly seems devoted to making your day perfect, though I have to say she's been asking a lot of questions about the reception timeline and meal service. Very thorough." Something about her tone made me glance over at Brooklyn, who was deep in conversation with the head caterer. They seemed to be discussing something intently, with Brooklyn gesturing toward the kitchen area. When she noticed me watching, she waved cheerfully and pointed to her watch, mouthing, "Almost time." The ceremony itself was everything I had dreamed of. St. Michael's Cathedral was filled with white roses and soft candlelight, creating a romantic atmosphere that took my breath away. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of my Uncle Thomas, my father's brother who had stepped in to fill that role, I saw David's face light up with joy and love. Brooklyn stood at the altar in her navy blue maid of honor dress, holding my bouquet, and beaming with what appeared to be genuine happiness. During the vows, I caught her wiping away tears, and my heart swelled with appreciation for having her there to share this moment. "I, Rachel Elizabeth Thompson, take you, David Michael Morrison, to be my husband," I said, my voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion. "In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do us part. When David and I kissed as husband and wife, the cathedral erupted in applause. Brooklyn was the first to hug me as we recessed down the aisle, whispering in my ear, "I'm so happy for you, Rach, you deserve this." The cocktail hour at the Fairmont passed smoothly, with guests mingling on the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. I moved through the crowd with David, accepting congratulations and catching up with friends and colleagues I hadn't seen in months. Brooklyn had changed into a different dress for the reception, a stunning emerald green number that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. "Your sister is quite something," commented Dr. Sarah Kim, my mentor from residency. "She's been making sure everyone has drinks and knows where they're supposed to sit. Natural hostess." I nodded, watching Brooklyn charm a group of David's college friends with what appeared to be a funny story. She had always been the more socially gifted of the two of us, able to work a room with ease while I preferred smaller, more intimate conversations. As dinner service began, Brooklyn took her place at the head table beside me. The meal was exquisite. Seared salmon with risotto that had been perfectly prepared by the Fairmont's renowned kitchen staff. Throughout dinner, Brooklyn regaled our table with stories from her recent auditions in LA, painting a picture of a vibrant life filled with possibility and adventure. "Tell them about the commercial you booked last month," I encouraged, wanting to showcase my sister's successes. Brooklyn's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, that. It was just a small thing. Nothing compared to your achievements, Dr. Morrison." She emphasized my new title with what I interpreted as playful teasing. "Are you kidding? You're living your dream in Hollywood. That takes incredible courage." "Courage," Brooklyn repeated, her tone suddenly flat. "Is that what we're calling it?" Before I could respond, the band leader announced that it was time for toasts. David's best man, his brother Michael, spoke first, sharing heartwarming stories about David's loyalty and kindness. Then it was Brooklyn's turn. She stood gracefully, champagne flute in hand, and surveyed the room full of guests. "I've known Rachel my entire life," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. "She's always been the responsible one, the achiever, the one who makes the right choices and gets rewarded for them." I smiled, expecting this to build toward typical maid of honor sentiments about love and happiness, but something in Brooklyn's tone made me pay closer attention. "Some people are just born lucky," she continued, her eyes meeting mine with an expression I couldn't read. "They get the grades, the scholarships, the perfect job, the perfect man. They seem to glide through life collecting successes while the rest of us struggle for recognition." An uncomfortable silence began to settle over the room. David squeezed my hand under the table, and I could see confusion on the faces of our guests. "But tonight isn't about luck or success," Brooklyn said, raising her glass higher. "Tonight is about Rachel finally getting what she's always wanted, to be the center of attention. So here's to my sister who has never met a spotlight she didn't love. May your marriage be as perfect as everything else in your charmed life." The toast ended with polite but uncertain applause. I forced a smile and hugged Brooklyn when she sat down, but her words stung. There had been an edge to them that I had never heard from her before, a bitterness that seemed to come from somewhere deep and painful. "That was intense," David whispered in my ear. "Is everything okay with Brooklyn?" "I think she's just emotional," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "You know how weddings can bring up complicated feelings." The dancing began shortly after, with David and I taking the floor for our first dance to At Last by Etta James. As we swayed together, I tried to push aside my concerns about Brooklyn's toast and focus on the joy of the moment. This was my wedding day, and I was married to the man I loved. After our dance, others joined us on the floor. I danced with David's father, my Uncle Thomas, and several of my medical school friends. Throughout the evening, I noticed Brooklyn seemed to be everywhere, chatting with guests, directing servers, and making sure everything ran smoothly. Her earlier toast seemed to be forgotten as she returned to her role as the perfect maid of honor. Around 10 p.m., Marina approached me with a bright smile. "It's time for the cake cutting. The photographer wants to capture it, and then we can start serving dessert." The wedding cake was a masterpiece. 3 tiers of vanilla sponge with raspberry filling and buttercream frosting, decorated with fresh white roses and delicate pearl details. Brooklyn had actually insisted on working with the pastry chef to ensure it was exactly what I wanted, spending hours discussing flavors and design elements. "It's absolutely beautiful," I breathed, admiring the intricate sugarwork and elegant presentation. Brooklyn appeared beside me, beaming with pride. "I wanted it to be perfect for you. The pastry chef let me help with some of the final touches this afternoon. I know how much you love vanilla raspberry." David and I posed for photos as we made the ceremonial first cut, laughing as we attempted to feed each other without making a mess. The photographer captured every moment as Brooklyn looked on with what appeared to be sisterly affection. "Save room for me," Brooklyn called out playfully. "I want to make sure the maid of honor gets the first official piece." As the cake was distributed to guests, Brooklyn personally handed me a beautifully plated slice, the layers perfectly visible and garnished with fresh raspberries. "The piece de resistance," she said with a flourish. "Enjoy every bite, sister." I took a large forkful, savoring the sweet vanilla cake and tart raspberry filling. It was absolutely delicious, and I complimented Brooklyn on her collaboration with the pastry chef. But as I continued eating, I began to notice a strange texture, something grainy and unexpected mixed in with the smooth frosting. "This tastes a little different than I expected," I mentioned to David, who was enjoying his own piece. "Tastes perfect to me," he replied. "Maybe your piece got some of the decorative elements mixed in." I took another bite, and the graininess became more pronounced. Suddenly, a horrifying realization began to dawn on me. The texture was familiar. I had encountered it before during accidental exposures in restaurants. My throat began to feel scratchy, and my heart rate started to increase. "David," I said, my voice becoming hoarse, "I think there's something wrong with my cake." Before he could respond, my throat began to close. The familiar, terrifying sensation of anaphylaxis kicked in as my body recognized the presence of peanuts, my most severe allergen. I had been vigilant about avoiding nuts my entire adult life, always carrying an EpiPen and informing restaurants and caterers about my allergy. "I can't breathe," I gasped, dropping my fork as my hands flew to my throat. "Peanuts! There are peanuts in the cake." Panic erupted around me as David shouted for help and guests began to realize what was happening. My vision started to blur as my blood pressure dropped, and I felt myself beginning to lose consciousness. That's when I heard Brooklyn's voice, calm and clear beside my ear as I collapsed into my chair. "You always had to be the center of attention," she whispered, so quietly that only I could hear. "Even on your own wedding day, you can't help but make it all about you." The words hit me like a physical blow as I struggled to comprehend what she was saying. Through my rapidly narrowing field of vision, I saw her face above mine. Not panicked or concerned like everyone else, but calm, almost satisfied. "My EpiPen," I managed to whisper. "In my purse." "Oh no," Brooklyn said loudly, her voice suddenly full of concern for the benefit of the gathering crowd. "Where is her purse? Someone find her medication." But I could see my purse on the table just feet away, easily within Brooklyn's reach. She made no move toward it. David appeared in my line of sight, his face white with terror. "Rachel, stay with me. Someone call 911. "I'll get her EpiPen," Brooklyn announced, moving toward my purse with theatrical urgency. But instead of opening it immediately, she seemed to fumble with the clasp, buying precious seconds as my condition deteriorated. Dr. Sarah Kim pushed through the crowd, her medical training taking over. "I'm a physician," she announced. "Give me the EpiPen now." Brooklyn finally produced the device, handing it to Dr. Kim with what looked like reluctance. As the epinephrine entered my system, I felt the immediate relief of my airways beginning to open, but I was still in critical condition. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately," Dr. Kim said. "This is severe anaphylaxis. The EpiPen will buy us time, but she needs comprehensive treatment." As the paramedics arrived and began preparing me for transport, Brooklyn climbed into the ambulance without being asked. "I'm her only family," she told the EMTs. "I need to stay with her." During the ride to Chicago General, ironically the hospital where I worked, Brooklyn held my hand and spoke in soothing tones about how everything would be okay, how grateful she was that I was alive, how sorry she was that this had happened on my wedding day. But her earlier words echoed in my mind. "You always had to be the center of attention." The emergency room team at Chicago General worked efficiently to stabilize my condition. As a colleague, they knew about my peanut allergy and took my case seriously, administering steroids and monitoring me for secondary reactions. David arrived. Shortly after the ambulance, still in his tuxedo, his face etched with worry and confusion. "How is this possible?" he asked Dr. Martinez, the attending physician. "We were so careful about the catering. We told them multiple times about Rachel's allergy." Brooklyn, still in her emerald green dress, dabbed at her eyes with tissues. "I don't understand it either. I specifically worked with the pastry chef to make sure the cake was safe. We went over the ingredients list multiple times. As the immediate crisis passed and I began to feel more stable, I found myself studying Brooklyn's face more carefully. Her distress seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the memory of her calm demeanor during my collapse or her whispered words about attention-seeking. "Brooke," I said carefully, my voice still hoarse from the reaction, "can you think of anything that might have gone wrong with the cake preparation?" Her eyes widened with apparent concern. "Nothing, Rach. We were so careful. Maybe there was cross-contamination. In the kitchen? Or maybe one of the vendors made a mistake?" Dr. Martinez reviewed my chart and looked up with a serious expression. "The reaction was quite severe. We're going to keep you overnight for observation, but you should make a full recovery. However, we'll need to investigate how this happened to prevent future incidents." "I want to talk to the catering manager," David said firmly. "Someone needs to answer for this." As the night wore on and visitors gradually left, Brooklyn remained by my bedside. She had been the perfect concerned sister, bringing me ice chips, adjusting my pillows, and updating our extended family about my condition. But I couldn't stop replaying the events of the evening in my mind. The next morning, Marina, the wedding coordinator, arrived looking distraught. "Rachel, I am so sorry about what happened. I've been investigating all night with the catering team." "What did you find?" I asked, sitting up in my hospital bed. "That's the strange thing," Marina replied, consulting her notebook. "The pastry chef swears the cake was made according to your specifications. No nuts, no cross-contamination protocols followed. But when we tested the remaining cake this morning, we found peanut oil mixed into the frosting of your specific piece." Blood ran cold. "Just my piece?" "Yes. The other pieces were clean. Someone would have had to add the peanut oil directly to your individual serving." Brooklyn, who had been quiet during this conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Maybe someone at the reception accidentally contaminated it. You know how chaotic these events can be." But Marina shook her head. The cake was cut and plated in a controlled environment. Only authorized personnel had access. I looked at Brooklyn carefully. "You said you helped with the final touches on the cake." "Just decorative elements," Brooklyn replied quickly. "I was nowhere near the actual frosting or filling." Something in her tone triggered a memory. I remembered her conversation with the head caterer before the ceremony, the intense way they had been discussing something. I remembered her insistence on personally handing me my piece of cake, her presence everywhere throughout the reception. "Brooke," I said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Her face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "Of course. Anything." "Did you put peanut oil in my cake?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Brooklyn's expression cycled through several emotions: surprise, hurt, indignation, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. "How could you even ask me that?" she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm your sister. I would never hurt you." "Then explain how peanut oil got into my specific piece of cake when you were the one who handed it to me," I pressed. Brooklyn stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when her facade cracked. Her shoulders sagged, and tears began streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of hurt or confusion. They were tears of someone who had been caught. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice becoming bitter and harsh. "Fine. Yes, I put peanut oil in your cake. Yes, I knew it would make you sick. And yes, I wanted to ruin your perfect wedding day." The confession hit me like a physical blow, even though part of me had suspected it. "Brooklyn, why? Why would you try to hurt me?" "Because I'm tired of living in your shadow," she exploded, all pretense of sisterly concern disappearing. Do you know what it's like being your sister? Perfect Rachel with her perfect grades and perfect career and perfect life? I stared at her in shock. Brooke, you never what? Never made me feel inadequate? Never succeeded at everything while I struggled for scraps? Her voice was getting louder, attracting attention from the nursing staff. Do you know what my life is really like in LA? I'm a waitress, Rachel. I serve coffee to people while I wait for auditions that lead nowhere. I live in a studio apartment with 3 roommates, and I haven't booked a paying job in 8 months. The pain in her voice was real, but it didn't excuse what she had done. So you decided to poison me? I wasn't trying to kill you, Brooklyn said defensively. I knew you had your EpiPen. I just wanted to mess up your perfect day. I wanted something to go wrong for you for once. I almost died, Brooklyn. If Dr. Kim hadn't been there, if the EpiPen hadn't worked. But it did work, she interrupted. You're fine. And now everyone will remember your wedding as the day something terrible happened. To poor Rachel, rather than celebrating your achievements. I felt sick to my stomach, and not from the lingering effects of the allergic reaction. This person sitting beside my hospital bed wasn't the sister I thought I knew. The bitterness and resentment she was expressing seemed to come from years of festering jealousy. Brooklyn, I had no idea you felt this way. We could have talked about it. I could have helped. Helped? She laughed bitterly. Like you've been helping all these years by being perfect at everything? Do you think I wanted your pity or your charity? Before I could respond, David returned with coffee and stopped short when he saw the tension in the room. What's going on? I looked at Brooklyn, giving her one last chance to confess properly. When she remained silent, I took a deep breath. Brooklyn put peanut oil in my wedding cake, I said quietly. She admitted it. David's coffee cup fell from his hand, crashing to the floor. What did you just say? Brooklyn stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. I'm not staying here to be judged by you people. Rachel always gets everyone's sympathy and support. Well, congratulations, sister. You've got it again. She stormed out of the hospital room, leaving David and me in stunned silence. A few minutes later, one of the nurses knocked on the door. Excuse me, Dr. Morrison. There are 2 police officers here who'd like to speak with you about the incident at your wedding reception. The investigation that followed was thorough and devastating. The hotel's security cameras had captured Brooklyn accessing the kitchen area during the reception, speaking with catering staff and specifically requesting to add a special touch to my piece of cake. When confronted with the evidence, the head pastry chef admitted that Brooklyn had convinced him to let her add what she claimed was a secret family recipe enhancement to my individual serving. The peanut oil she had used was traced back to a bottle she had purchased at a grocery store near the hotel that morning. She had carried it in her purse throughout the wedding ceremony and reception, waiting for the right moment to execute her plan. Brooklyn was arrested at LAX as she attempted to board a flight back to Los Angeles. When the police searched her luggage, they found a notebook containing detailed plans for disrupting my wedding, including research about my peanut allergy and calculations about how much oil would be needed to cause a severe reaction without being immediately detectable. The notebook was the most disturbing evidence of all. It revealed that Brooklyn's resentment toward me wasn't a recent development, but something she had been nurturing for years. She had documented my successes with bitter commentary, compared our lives in obsessive detail, and ultimately concluded that I deserved to suffer for having what she called an unearned perfect life. During her court proceedings, more details emerged about Brooklyn's actual situation in Los Angeles. She had been fired from 3 restaurant jobs for attitude problems, had been evicted from 2 apartments for non-payment of rent, and had accumulated significant debt from unsuccessful attempts to fund her acting career. Rather than reaching out for help or being honest about her struggles, she had been maintaining a facade of success while her resentment toward me grew toxic. The legal consequences were severe. Brooklyn was charged with attempted poisoning, reckless endangerment, and assault. Because the incident occurred during a wedding reception with hundreds of witnesses, and because she had documented her premeditation, the prosecution had an airtight case. During her sentencing hearing, Brooklyn finally showed remorse, but it felt too little, too late. She apologized to me in open court, acknowledging that her actions could have killed me, and that her jealousy had driven her to an inexcusable crime. I let my failures consume me, she said, her voice breaking. Instead of working to improve my own life, I became obsessed with tearing down my sister's happiness. There's no excuse for what I did. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. The judge noted that while her personal struggles were tragic, attempting to poison someone out of jealousy represented a profound moral failure that required serious consequences. The aftermath of Brooklyn's actions extended far beyond the legal proceedings. David and I had to postpone our honeymoon while dealing with police interviews, court appearances, and the emotional trauma of the betrayal. Our wedding, which should have been a joyful memory, was forever tainted by the knowledge that my own sister had tried to harm me during what should have been the happiest day of my life. Perhaps even more difficult was processing the relationship I thought I had with Brooklyn. Looking back, I could see signs of her resentment that I had missed or misinterpreted. Comments that I had taken as playful teasing were actually expressions of genuine bitterness. Her enthusiasm for helping with my wedding hadn't been sisterly love, but an opportunity to get close enough to sabotage it. The hardest part was accepting that the sister I thought I knew, supportive, loving, proud of my achievements, had never really existed. Brooklyn had been performing a role for years while harboring deep resentment and jealousy. Every hug, every congratulations, every expression of sisterly pride had been false. David and I sought couples counseling to help us process the trauma and rebuild our sense of trust and safety. It took months before I could eat in restaurants again without anxiety, and I became hypervigilant about my food in ways that affected my daily life. The hardest part, I told our therapist during one session, is that I can't separate the good memories of our childhood from knowing how she really felt about me. Were any of our moments together genuine? David held my hand as I struggled with these questions. He had been incredibly supportive throughout the ordeal, but I knew the experience had changed him too. His trust in family relationships had been shaken, and he worried about my emotional well-being in ways that added stress to our new marriage. As Brooklyn served her sentence, I received several letters from her. The early ones continued to justify her actions and blame me for her problems. But over time, as she participated in counseling programs, her letters began to show genuine remorse and self-reflection. I realize now that my problems were never about you, she wrote in one letter. They were about my own failures and my inability to take responsibility for my choices. I used you as a scapegoat because it was easier than facing the truth about myself. I never responded to these letters. While I appreciated that she was working on herself, I wasn't ready to engage with her attempts at reconciliation. The betrayal had been too profound, the danger too real, and the deception too extensive for me to simply forgive and move forward. 2 years after the wedding incident, David and I were finally able to take the honeymoon we had postponed. As we sat on a beach in Greece watching the sunset over the Aegean Sea, I reflected on how far we had come. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" I asked David one evening. "I mean, considering all the drama and trauma that came with it?" He turned to me with surprise. "Rachel, you're not responsible for what Brooklyn did. And even if I had known what would happen, I would still choose to marry you every single day." His words were exactly what I needed to hear, but I still struggled with feelings of guilt and responsibility. I wondered if I had been insensitive to Brooklyn's struggles, if I had inadvertently contributed to her resentment by not recognizing her pain. Our therapist helped me understand that while it's natural to examine our role in family dynamics, I couldn't take responsibility for Brooklyn's choices or her inability to communicate her feelings in healthy ways. "Sibling rivalry and jealousy are normal," she explained. "What's not normal is attempting to poison someone because of those feelings." Brooklyn had many opportunities to address her concerns, seek help for her struggles, or simply distance herself. If the relationship was too painful, she chose violence instead. 3 years after the incident, Brooklyn was released on parole. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved to a different state and was working in a treatment center, helping people with addiction and mental health issues. She had apparently found purpose in using her experience to help others, which I was glad to hear, even though I had no desire for direct contact. David and I had built a strong, loving marriage despite the traumatic beginning. We had learned to trust each other completely and to communicate openly about our fears and concerns. In some ways, surviving Brooklyn's betrayal together had made our relationship stronger and more resilient. We also started a family. Our daughter, Emma, was born 4 years after our wedding, and our son James arrived 2 years later. As I held my children and felt the overwhelming love that comes with parenthood, I couldn't comprehend how anyone could deliberately harm a family member out of jealousy or resentment. Motherhood also gave me new perspective on my relationship with Brooklyn. I began to wonder if there had been dynamics in our childhood that I hadn't understood at the time, perhaps parental favoritism or unrealistic expectations that had contributed to her feelings of inadequacy. I reached out to our Uncle Thomas, who had become something of a father figure after our parents died, to ask about his observations of our family dynamics growing up. "Your parents were good people," he told me carefully, "but they were also high achievers who valued academic and professional success above almost everything else. Brooklyn was more artistic and free-spirited, and I think she felt like she could never measure up to their expectations or to your achievements." This conversation helped me understand that while Brooklyn's actions were inexcusable, they hadn't emerged from nowhere. She had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy and competition for years, and rather than addressing these issues in healthy ways, she had allowed them to fester into something toxic and dangerous. Understanding her motivation didn't excuse what she had done, but it did help me process my own feelings of confusion and betrayal. I could grieve for the sister I thought I had while acknowledging the real pain that had driven her to such desperate actions. 5 years after our wedding, David and I returned to the Fairmont Hotel for our anniversary dinner. It was the first time I had been back to the scene of the incident, and I felt nervous as we walked into the same reception hall where I had collapsed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" David asked, noticing my tension. "I need to," I replied. "I can't let that night control my life forever." As we sat at a table overlooking Lake Michigan, I realized that I had reclaimed my power. Brooklyn's attempt to ruin my happiness had failed. I had a wonderful marriage, beautiful children, a successful career, and a life filled with love and purpose. The incident had taught me valuable lessons about family relationships, the danger of unaddressed resentment, and the importance of open communication. I had also learned that some people's problems run so deep that love and support aren't enough to fix them. Sometimes people have to hit rock bottom before they can begin to heal. "I forgive her," I said to David over dessert, surprising myself with the words. "Really?" he asked gently. "Not for her sake," I clarified. "For mine. I can't carry this anger forever. It's too heavy, and it's not serving me or our family." Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what Brooklyn had done. It meant choosing to release my resentment so that I could move forward with my life fully and freely. As we drove home that night, past the hospital where I had worked and where I had recovered from Brooklyn's attack, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I had survived something that could have killed me, both physically and emotionally. I had built a beautiful life despite the trauma, and I had learned to trust again after betrayal. Brooklyn had tried to poison my wedding day because she believed I was stealing her thunder. But thunder is temporary. It makes noise and then it passes. What remains are the things we build with love, patience, and integrity. Marriages, families, careers that serve others, and relationships based on genuine care rather than competition. Looking back now, I can see that Brooklyn's greatest tragedy wasn't that she didn't achieve the success she wanted, but that she was unable to find joy in the people she loved. Her jealousy had poisoned her heart long before she ever put peanut oil in my cake. Today, I'm grateful for the life I have, not because it's perfect or because I deserve it more than anyone else, but because I've learned to appreciate it despite its challenges. I'm grateful for the husband who stood by me through trauma, for the children who fill our home with laughter, for the career that allows me to help others, and even for the painful lessons that taught me about the complexity of family relationships. If you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics or felt like someone close to you was trying to sabotage your happiness, I hope my story reminds you that you're not responsible for other people's choices or emotions. You can't love someone into being healthy, and you can't sacrifice your own well-being to fix their problems. The most important thing I learned is that your happiness isn't something you steal from others. It's something you create through your choices, your relationships, and your response to life's challenges. No one can take that away from you, no matter how hard they try. Share your own stories about overcoming family betrayal in the comments below. Like and subscribe if this resonated with you. And remember, sometimes the people who try to poison your joy end up showing you just how strong and resilient you really are. Thank you for listening to my journey from wedding day trauma to healing and hope. And remember, your light doesn't dim when others try to blow it out. It just reveals how powerful it really is.